This is Katrin with Disability Rights New York. Welcome to our podcast, Empire State of Rights, where we bring you information on the most relevant topics regarding disability rights and advocacy. Today, we welcome Half Access Treasurer TJ Hayes and board member Valerie Kraft to discuss accessibility requirements and inclusion for live music events. Valerie, TJ, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, it's great to be here today.
Well, it's great to have you. And before we start, we're going to give our self-descriptions. And for me, I am a white woman in my late 40s. I have a violet shirt on, long brown wavy hair. And I don't know if you can see it, but I always have this blue necklace on. And TJ, if you could please provide a self-description as well.
I'm TJ. I'm a biracial, non-binary person, and I'm wearing a black hoodie. You can only see part of it right now, but it's an Accessibility Matters hoodie, and you can see the accessibility symbol as well as the sign language symbol on rainbow background.
And I'm Valerie. I am a white woman in my early 20s. I have a long brown, really curly hair, and I'm currently wearing a black shirt with roses on the sleeves.
Thank you so much. And we'll talk a little bit about what you both do for Half Access. And let's give our audience an idea of what Half Access is, what its mission is, what you do there, and why was it created?
So Half Access was a nonprofit originally started by Cassie Wilson back in 2017. She really just saw that she had the disabled concert goer herself. She saw a lot of issues, and she realized that she wasn't the only one going through that. So we currently have a database of over 500 venues and counting across the entire world at this point. That's entirely like crowd run. So like fans, bands, anyone can submit to it, and then we go up on our end and make it public. And our goal is to make sure that disabled people not only can attend as fans, but like we want to have accessibility on the stage and with crews as well.
In addition to our database, we also work to just improve the awareness of accessibility needs within live music. And that's both with musicians, artists, bookers, concert promoters, everyone involved in the industry, and other fans as well. My role with the organization is I'm a board member. I joined the team just under a year ago, and I'm really helping on sort of the more community engagement and awareness efforts side of the house.
Thank you both so much for that information. I mean, here we are in kind of the middle of summer, and people want to be going to concerts. They want to be out and seeing things. And certainly it's not like we don't do it all year round, but it seems like there's more people getting out when it's nice out. And accessibility and accommodation isn't necessarily something that people are thinking about, whether they're the musicians going to a venue or even the fans. Let's talk about what accessibility accommodations that the venues are actually required to provide, because I think there's a little bit of a lack of information of what venues are required to provide. And then, of course, we should be talking about what should they be providing. So, Valerie, do you want to start off and just talk a little bit about the requirements, and then we can move to what else really needs to be happening?
Absolutely. So TJ is kind of our expert working at a venue themselves about what venues are required to actually do. The unfortunate reality is it is a very short list with a lot of loopholes, and a lot of it just comes down to what are the basic ADA requirements for building accessibility, which again, depending on the venue size, how old the venue is, all of those other different factors, just kind of like with buildings in general. It's pretty iffy. One of the sort of biggest requirements is accessible seating tickets. And this is something that typically pertains to venues that are like stadiums or basketball arenas. When they have a specific section, there's laws in place about like how many tickets must be denoted for specifically ADA or disabled seating. TJ, is there anything else that I'm missing here that you want to add on?
Oh, you can't cover it all. It's like the actual specific number is venues are required to have 1% of their seating to be reserved for ADA seating, as well as they're required to have a minimum of 3 companion seats in that section. And if they're not able to put it in that section, it has to be the next closest. but unfortunately, it's not enforced a lot, and that's more with arenas and stuff. When you get to GA venues, there's not a lot. We're required to have some sort of accommodation, but what that accommodation is entirely up to the venue and how they decide to handle that.
PJ, let's talk a little bit more about that. So we're talking about 1% of the seating as a whole. Is that correct? Or is it 1% of the ticket sales?
From my understanding, it's just like the seating. So like if there's 1,000 seats in the venue, like 100 or so has to be 80 reserved for ADA seating. But there's also the added issue of if other sections are sold out, then they're allowed to sell the ADA to non like disabled patrons.
I knew where I was going with that
Yeah.
question. Guess I was going to say, well, what happens when? And here's another question. So what happens when, say those 100 seats are sold out for people who need accommodations, and yet someone else needs an accommodation as well? Is there any mechanism right now that say 1,000 people who need accommodations need seats? Is there a way, or is there a mechanism where a venue would be compelled to add more seats?
So unfortunately, at least from the legal standpoint, there's really not. They just have that 1% rule. So I know at my venue, like if someone walks up and they're like, I need ADA seating, like we will do everything in our power to make sure that happens. Like we'll find a seat. We'll make a section that's not normally an ADA section, like appropriate for them, but there's only so many seats in the room. Like not everyone is gonna. It's just not realistic with space all the time.
And Valerie, so let's talk a little bit about money on this side too. So we're talking about 1% of seating, right? And then there's also the progressive seating prices, right? So anytime we're going to a venue, you can buy tickets that are right up front. They cost a lot of money. And then we have the less expensive seats that maybe, people refer to as the nosebleed section, where you're really super far away. And at certain venues that I have been there, the ADA seating is not the best seating. It's oftentimes the ones that are furthest away, and also cost the least amount of money. And so I find this really interesting, like on two different levels, and frustrating as well, right? Because it really means two things. If you want to have a great seat, you can pay for it, but you won't have accessibility or an accommodation. And if you need an accommodation and you're going to be very far away and not have a great seat. So how do those things play out for the disability community? I mean, there are so many different parts of this that we could talk about, but I think the financial implications are one of the ones that maybe people aren't thinking about as much, right? Talk a little bit about that if you can.
Absolutely. And I think this is a really well-timed conversation to be having. I think the Taylor Swift Eras Tour is such a great case study on this. I think one thing people don't necessarily realize is when we talk about big arenas or stadiums that do actually have dedicated, like, this area of chairs is for disabled patrons only, a lot of times when there's artist pre-sale or anything before general on sale, you usually cannot buy disabled seating until general on sale. So even if you were one of the lucky people who got the Taylor Swift pre-code, it doesn't matter. You can't get the ticket you need. Now, of course, in this kind of particular debacle, we know that tickets from those sections were actually just being sold in those pre-sales, in the general on sales. But in many instances, you can't even purchase those tickets online. You have to either wait for the general on sale, and sometimes even when general on sale happens, you have to call. So even if you have all of the money in the world, before we even kind of can get to the financial question of, well, there's some ADA sections in the 100 level, the 200, that you have to be able to get access to buy the tickets in the first place. That's honestly, in some cases, the biggest barrier. The other issue, of course, is when you're given a seat in one of those sections, sometimes it's marked on your ticket, sometimes it's not marked on your ticket, sometimes the ADA sections move around. Sometimes if you're buying a general admission ticket, and we see this a lot in venues that are general admission, just it's a whole floor, the ADA section is in the very back in a corner. And I understand from a safety perspective that, the ADA section cannot be in like the center of a venue where there's going to be people moshing. Like it's just a general safety issue. But if you're somebody who spent as much money as everybody else in that room, and everybody else has the opportunity to stand to where they want, to come early if they want, and your option is chair in the back behind a wall, it's not the same experience. And I know many disabled people, myself included many times, have been like, okay, I can't even see what I paid for. So really in both scenarios, in places that they don't already have kind of those pre-existing ADA sections, so it is easier to get a ticket because you don't have to jump through those hoops. You don't have a guaranteed good view, and places where you at least know what your view is going to look like, it's so difficult to even get those tickets in the first place.
And so you bring up an interesting point on this. We're talking about specific artists, right? Where there have been so many concerts or shows or events that have happened, I would say, in the last year, where ticket prices have been off the charts is an understatement, right? They became financially inaccessible to most people, and in fact, like broke down ticket sales companies, right? And so, TJ, let's talk a little bit about how we are, not just the venues themselves, but the artists. Is there a way, or are there artists that are looking at the issue of accessibility from literally the barrier, the financial barrier, as Valerie said, the barrier to even getting on and being able to buy the ticket because of pre-sale quotas. And so if you're getting through maybe those two hoops, then there's the actual hoop, which is, well, where is this person going to be able to be at the concert, and how is it going to be safe as well as enjoyable, as well as having a great experience? So TJ, can you talk a little bit about that and how we're seeing this arc really kind of change? And is there something that artists can do, or is there a campaign to help artists start to get involved in this?
Yeah, I say the band The Wonder Years is the band that we've worked with a lot, and like they are really like the gold standard, I think, with like making their shows accessible for all. They on their one of their tours, they had it in their rider on every venue that they had to submit accessibility information to our database, so fans knew right away before they went. And then they had like a whole, like on social media, they had like a whole list of things. Like they had signage at all of their venues. They had contact information. Like if you're having an issue, like let us know. Like we will work to fix it. It's like little things like that that bands can really get involved and like help make it more accessible, because venues seem to listen to the artist a lot more than fans. I can go on Twitter and complain all day about how I can't see at a show, or like this accessibility section sucks, and like they don't really listen. But when a band is like, our fans cannot see the show, suddenly everyone's trying to move mountains. So really, just I think bands is speaking up and like making their opinions known on social media and letting the venues know directly.
It really is that simple sometimes. I mean, I think of some other examples, bands like Stand Atlantic or Heart Attack Man, who have just come out and said, if you're ever at a show and you're a wheelchair user, you need seating for whatever reason, and the venue is not providing it to you, find a member of our team and we'll figure something out. We'll put you at our merch table. We'll put you on the side of the stage. Like we'll just kind of circumvent things and we'll make something happen. There was a band, State Champs, that they were playing in a venue where the area where their merch would be sold, there was a few steps to get up of it. And so they made some signs that said, hey, we're so sorry, this is the limitation of the venue. But if you want something and can't access this, please text this number, call this number, and we'll get you taken care of. So I think a lot of artists are under the kind of misunderstanding that if they can't sort of like solve every accessibility issue, then there's nothing for them to do. But small things like that, just doing what is within their power reasonably, really can make a huge difference for guests attending.
I agree. And I feel like the just the acknowledgement, right? So even if something is not really working the way it should be, and as everyone knows who's ever either been attending a show or been trying to put on a show or even a workshop, for goodness sake, there's something can always go wrong. And calling it out and saying, you know what, this we didn't know about this, right? And that is sometimes the answer. We didn't know. And now that we know, we're going to try and do better. And in the meantime, we're doing this. And so TJ, talk a little bit about that communication, right? So you said that venues will listen to the artists. And I do think a lot of artists will listen to fans, right? And it's a matter of cultivating that conversation, the experience of letting artists know what is needed. Because, I feel like whether it's accessibility of a venue or I think of course, way back before the internet, when Rock the Vote was something that artists got involved in to move a specific issue. And so I think that there's precedent for that, right? We can have artists really working to make change. And so Chidi, talk a little bit about, you've talked about some bands, you've talked about how like this information system works, and it sounds like you work at a really great venue. Are there tips for fans to say, hey, let's let your favorite artists know we want to see you, and these are the things that are stopping it from happening?
Honestly, like in this day and age, social media is our biggest superpower with that. I've seen so many cases go viral, people tweeting about their, like tagging the band and tweeting their experiences about it. And like, that is how the artists have seen it. And then they're interacting with it and being like, yeah, no, this is going to change. And then from there, bands can get in contact with, their booking agent or their management, or even they can even email and contact the venues directly and help to start creating or removing those barriers, or seeing like how can we adjust this? How can we make this work? I think really, social media, getting in contact with the artist is really a big way to start that conversation in this day.
It sounds like you've had some experience with seeing that happen. And so TJ, talk a little bit about some of the common accessibility issues that right now Half Access is observing at venues, and like which issues, when we're looking at the accessibility issues, are the ones that really need to have more attention brought to them.
Some of the most common ones, like I'm personally a wheelchair user, so like the accessible seating is a big thing that I deal with every day. But even like providing ASL interpreters and having access to food and water is a lot of barriers that venues are not really accommodating well right now. All of them, it's like, you gotta contact us a month ahead of time, and we might provide you an interpreter if you contact us right away, or you have to have 1,000,001 doctor's notes to be able to bring your own food or water in. Otherwise, you're paying $6 for a bottle of water. Otherwise, you're gonna or your alternative is pass out in the crowd. Or even like lighting. Lighting is a big issue that unfortunately I am not as educated on right now. I think Valerie might have a little bit more experiences with. But like, that's a big thing. Like, people don't think about people that have seizures and stuff. They still want to be able to attend shows. And the Wonder Years did a really good job with that. Is they had signage at their venue. They made sure that their lighting package was as accessible as possible, and then they also had signage throughout the venue, warning people like, at this show, this will happen.
Lighting is definitely a big one that people tend to not think about. I think when the general public, hear the word accessibility, they think wheelchair, and that's definitely a very huge component of this. But there's other things as well. So like TJ mentioned, being able to have food and water for people with other medical needs, if they need to be eating specific things. We hear from a lot of diabetics that there's a lot of issues with insulin pumps getting confiscated, or being seen as them kind of bringing drugs in when they're like, I really can't be parted with this right now. Epilepsy and folks that have light sensitivities is another one. Another common issue that people don't think about as bag policies. Folks with chronic illnesses or other health issues are often having to take a lot of things with them. I know I'm one of those people. And whether that is different medical supplies or solutions, again, that can be something that's just barred from the get-go. A lot of venues don't allow anything bigger than like a wallet size now. And while I obviously understand the safety and security concerns, a lot of times if you're somebody who needs to bring a bigger bag, if you go on the website and you click on like accessibility, it gives you an email and then no one answers the email. And then you're like, well, can I bring this bag or not? And so you just have to show up and hope that somebody at security is going to be benevolent enough to understand your needs and let you in. Knowing that if they don't, then you don't really know what you're going to do. And so that's a very big problem in kind of both ways, the lack of ability to have communication and confirmation that your needs are actually going to get met, and sort of the I'm walking into a show and I don't even know what barriers I'm going to encounter. And that's a really big part of why we want to have our database have as many venues as possible, because in instances where you can't get in contact with the venue and no one's answering your calls, we can at least have as much of the information as we can possibly have there for you, so you know what you need to do to prepare. Some smaller venues don't necessarily have accessible bathrooms. It's just sort of like a one gender neutral bathroom situation that's not really all that big. And, you know, accessible bathrooms are not just for wheelchair users. There's people with many different reasons why they need to have a bigger stall or a stall with a handrail. So just a lot of different things. I think in some ways phrasing it as what are different needs that people at this concert may have is sort of a better frame than how can we make this accessible, because people get so stuck on the, well, I can't level the building, so it is what it is. And it's like, no, there's things that you can do. I understand we can't, you know, completely, you know, demolition and restart, but, you know, bring in a ramp, have a show code for your lighting, have somebody who's actually going to answer the email for people, or have a policy in place for medical exceptions for your different policies, and don't make people require 14 different doctor's notes and a letter from God himself to prove that I really need to take this Advil in with me. I mean, you know, come on.
Well, I think you bring up a couple of really great points, which, you know, we're kind of laughing a little bit about them as they are actually true, though, and ridiculous, right? Like these are real circumstances where the proof of what you're trying to bring an Advil in for is taking more than probably, I can't even make a comparison, you know, but we're laughing about it because it seems so ridiculous. And yet this is what's happening for people wanting to go to a show. And I'm sure you have heard this, you both have heard this, you know, that, well, we don't really have a lot of people who have disabilities that come to our venue, right? Well, you don't, because they can't, right? So TJ, talk a little bit about that. I mean, and there are different responses, some of them that Valerie had just brought up, right? Where it's like, there is this kind of like, it's like a complete hang on when you say accessibility, right? Like we can't do, it's an immediate, we can't do this. And so when we are faced with this, and as you are working towards making venues more accessible, talk a little bit about the responses that you're getting, that, and we can say, you know, good responses and bad responses, right? Because they're not all bad. And then also the idea that there's no real education around people with disabilities are actually trying to get to your venues and they can't. So that's why you don't see them. Talk a little bit about that, TJ.
Yes, that has been my personal experience. I've had that exact, I've showed up to venues and had that exact response. We've never had a wheelchair user show up here before. I'm like, I wonder why. I had one venue try to deny me entry once, and straight said we had the inspector in earlier and they said we're technically not accessible. I'm like, you have 3 flights of stairs. You are not, technically you are inaccessible.
Yeah.
But like, unfortunately, like luckily though, there are some incredible venues that I've personally experienced, that like they will figure it out when you show up. I've had venues like just like on the spot, just take like barricades and like create like a little square next to the stage and have like an impromptu ADA section, or like, yeah, we can put you right here, right there. But unfortunately, there are just as many that it's they just have the response like that sucks, or Like, this is how it's always been, so why change it? But I'm like, our money's the same. Like, we want to come to shows too. So
Right. And I think the overall lack of knowledge of the things that really can be done, like you said,
yeah,
making an impromptu, space. I've seen that happen in the middle of a mosh pit
yep,
where there has literally been barricades moved out. And I will say that I have seen that happen more often than not at hardcore shows
yes.
than any other ones.
Yeah, I'm very much like a metalcore hardcore kid growing up. So like, well, a lot of disabled people want to be like they want to be in the ADA section. Like, that's another issue too. Like, it's not one size fits all, because I am personally someone that's in the middle of the pit, and like I'm just like a part of it, and I love that. And all too often I deal with like people that, like, they want to barricade around me and like protect me, like I'm fragile, or they think because I'm there that they aren't allowed to have fun anymore. Like, I know how to handle myself. I wouldn't be there if I didn't think I couldn't handle it. Just don't be a jerk.
And so we see a lot of different ways that, and in those cases, I think that's where the audience actually gets involved and helps make places either safe or accessible, and moving people to where they want to be moved. So let's talk a little bit about, well, also about the blog, right? So you have a great blog, and the call to action, disabled people to the front, which I just love that. Talk to us about this crowdsourcing and the progress of this movement. Like, as we've been talking about, there's so many key factors in this. There's so many key players, right? Where it's from the audience to the artist to the venue to people who are even there for the building security, right? Like, understanding what is necessary, what's needed, and how can we help. Talk to us about the movement itself, and also let's talk about how to get people really involved. Valerie, you want to give us some information on that?
Absolutely. It's sort of a bit of a paradox, but we almost saw the most success with getting people to understand that this is a really significant issue during COVID. It was almost the absence of concerts and the introduction of live streams and people realizing the benefit of live streams that got people realizing, oh, this is an alternative that is accessible to everyone. I mean, of course, you still have to have internet access and, be able to afford the ticket price, but in general, it's a cheaper ticket price because you're not needing to, deal with all of the different costs that go into an actual physical tour. And anybody with accessibility needs, they're able to watch this at home. And of course, we want people to be able to go to shows in person and have those needs met. But for people who that isn't even an option, what if you're somebody who's in the hospital, or what if you're currently bedbound or recovering from a surgery? There's other people who that may be their only way to experience a concert. And it was that conversation that I think got people talking and realizing, oh, these concerts that we had previously, how many people were they leaving out? Because how many people were going to their first concert virtually? And then we've seen a little bit of kind of I feel like a backtrack now that concerts have come back. I think it's been, everybody is so excited to have live music again, that all of these great things that we talked about that they want to implement, they're just so excited to be here that they're just here. I think that there's a way that we can get that momentum back, and it's about reminding people about those conversations. It's about reminding people, okay, I know you're so excited to be back, but do you know who would like to be back here with you? It's disabled fans. And I think too, understanding that the music industry is more flexible than previously thought. When you think about live stream shows, that was something that was like never offered before. And then all of a sudden, every artist overnight learned how to do it. And so it's like, okay, you clearly have the ability to adapt and to change. And so, there are different things that you can do to make your shows more accessible. It's just about continuing to have those conversations, continuing to partner with artists, and And the artists really do play such a big role. When it comes to fan culture, if an artist is telling you that something is important to them, those fans are going to take it and run with it. If we think about, going back to sort of the Taylor Swift Eras Tour example, Taylor Swift would have gone on Twitter and said, please don't sit in the ADA section or get a ticket there if you're not actually disabled. There would be like a Swiftie task force that would have formed to like make sure.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that I think people think it takes so much, and it does, but just because you don't have the ability to change everything, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't change the things you can, because that really does make a difference.
Yeah, we're not asking you to move mountains. We're just asking for like the bare minimum.
That's right. And that's actually that's not enough, right? At the end of the day, like that is not enough. And there's a part of it that's like, it seems like so much now because so much needs to be done, right? So if making venues accessible to the greatest extent that they can be, right? Where, as we talked a little bit about earlier, there are as many disabilities as there are people with disabilities, right? There are as many accommodations that someone might need that you can think of, and they are all very specific. So there's no way that we're going to be able to think of every single one of them, right? But if we're starting out from the point of making sure that the most accessible venues are available, then we don't have that much further to go. And thinking about COVID and thinking about Zoom, so many things changed, right? Where even what we're doing now, we're able to record a podcast. We were able to have education-based, school online for even people in kindergarten, right? So all of this changed with the shutdown. And one thing that, to your point, Valerie, really kind of shocked me, and I was not that happy about it, was when so I don't know anything about sports, but I think it was a Super Bowl where they had ASL and they had an Academy Award winner, Tony, and I think it's Kotzer, I don't want to mispronounce his name, but I think that's how you spell it or say it, was signing the music, and but he was off screen. Unless you had the link to the ASL version, you weren't going to see it. And so those are the things that it's like you're so close to getting it right. And yet this person should have been right next to the singer, right? So that everyone could see both. And instead, there's this separate space that if you didn't have the link, and if you don't have internet and maybe you're watching on an actual analog television, you don't get to see the ASL. And so I do find that part of it that, we're close on a lot of different things. And yet the understanding of why ASL is needed and that it really is for everyone is shocking to me. And so talk a little bit about that and how different venues or different artists and in different ways, like we're moving towards this space of getting it right because we've seen it. Now, like seeing ASL on Zoom all the time is something that people are more familiar with. Do you think that it's the exposure to more accessibility in a way that people are seeing it in their regular everyday lives now, that is maybe changing the landscape of how venues might be able to see how this works a little bit easier?
I think it's both about exposure, but with some degree of education. And so I think about your example about the ASL interpreter. A lot of people who don't, and I don't want to say all, but a lot of people who don't have needs for interpretation are probably not going to think there should be an ASL interpreter here. It's just not going to come across their mind. Same with folks that don't have any accessibility needs. They're not going to think about, what's missing at this concert? And if they are seeing repeatedly, oh, there's an ADA section. Oh, there's an interpreter. Oh, there's a sign about the lights that we'll be using during the show. they'll start to notice when those things are absent. And so we need to have enough exposure that it being present is the norm and it being missing is the anomaly. But the other part of that is there does need to be a degree of education, because in many instances, the people that are implementing these accommodations are able-bodied. And sometimes, although they have the best intentions, they are not people who are using these accommodations themselves. And they might be super proud and like, we did it, we have this policy and it's amazing, but they're not the ones using it. And the disabled people using it might be like, I'm so grateful you did this, and I really appreciate you trying, but it needs to be like this, or, but this is an issue I found. And I think there needs to be an openness to be willing to hear that feedback and to not be kind of too stuck in the sort of savior complex of I did this, I saved the disabled people, and being willing to say, okay, this is what I implemented, this is my job, and I'm employed at this venue, etc. But being willing to take feedback from fans, from patrons, and even learning from other venues, asking what it is that they do, what their fans do. But it's both. We need venues to be doing it, to show other venues that they have no excuse not to do it because other venues are doing it. But again, there needs to be that willingness to understand that the systems that they put in place may need to be altered, and there's nothing wrong with that. And we appreciate them trying their best, but until they're the ones utilizing the accommodation, how do you know if it's really working?
That's right. And to your point, when we're having policy made without people with lived experience at the table, we're going to miss out on an awful lot of information, right? And TJ, when you're looking at the venue that you work at specifically, was there a time that this was new information to them? And can you kind of go through how the conversations went, or how it was that they really started to incorporate these changes into the venue itself?
Yeah, I'm actually very fortunate that when I came in, I'm like, my managers and everyone really knows their stuff and they're educated. Like, even when it comes to, like Valerie mentioned, people with diabetes and insulin pumps earlier, we use metal detectors at my venue, and like my managers are already on top of it. And they know that they can't go through that, so we just let them go around it, and we do like a hand pat down, or like as long as they say like I have this disability, I need this accommodation, like we'll give them water or whatever it takes. So like I've been personally very fortunate, at least with my building. It's more just every once in a while we'll get a new coworker come in that hasn't worked in a venue before, so it's helping them understand and know the laws, and like no, not everyone's just like faking it, or they haven't just been drinking. Like this is like how to recognize disability side effects or symptoms or whatever versus just someone.
I think that's an interesting point. There's a lot of education that needs to be made public to venues, and I always think of like security that sometimes comes in who isn't necessarily employed by the venue. Sometimes they use an outside source of really what a disability is and presents as in that's different from something they may think they're seeing, which, oftentimes we are faced with how something presents as being very different than what it actually is, and how it is that we really educate people that, what we're looking for is this. What a person with an accommodation is looking for is this, and how to really have that incorporated as part of onboarding for staff and for people who are in the decision-making processes, and bringing people with lived experience to the table. And so when we talk about, Half Access, you have an extensive database right now of national, international venues, and you note the accessibility features, what's not accessible, accommodations that are offered, and contact information. Talk about the process of building this, and also, is there a component of this that is helping to do the education for the venues that you're citing, right? I mean, if I'm a venue owner and I see my name on this list, I'm going to want to know more information. Are you getting that kind of feedback? So talk a little bit about the process and whether or not you're getting feedback from the people who are on it.
Yeah, so like it really started off just very grassroots. Like we all started just by like submitting the venues in our own areas that we knew. And then once app access got more public, we started having fans submit, and we have had a few venues reach out, and we've worked with a couple and like gone like sat on calls like this and like gone down like everything they currently have and like what they could change. And we have unfortunately also had some bad reactions from certain venues. We've had a few. One of our board members had tweeted about their experiences at a venue, and then that venue was emailing us like trying to defend themselves and being like, no, like we have this, or we're not as bad as you're making it out to be. And when in reality they are, and like they have to make changes. So, yeah, we've had very mixed. Mostly it's venues that just they don't know, but they're excited. Like once they know, they're happy to fix the issues and learn. But we definitely have also had our fair share of ones that want to just defend themselves and like say that they're fine how they are.
Valerie, can you talk a little bit about the information that's being gathered from the crowdsourcing side?
Absolutely. So it's a really extensive form that you can fill out, and like nothing on there is a requirement. And so if you don't know all of the answers, you don't have to complete everything. We'll take the information we can get. So it's anything from like very classic accessibility thoughts, are there steps? Is this a flat floor? Is this something that's easy to roll off of? Or is this like a really uneven, like patchwork kind of surface? Is there an accessible bathroom? Are the doorways wide? But we also ask about, is there any sort of early entry or skip the line? If you think about kind of like maybe like the classic music festival or things when it's like the doors open, it's like the stampede to the front. And it's like, how is a person with maybe mobility issue or somebody who moves slower or a wheelchair user going to safely navigate that? So is that an option? Is there any sort of accessibility procedures already in place on their website? Is there a certain contact? Do they have interpreters available? So it's really pretty extensive. We also have just like a room for them to just kind of put any other additional thoughts, as well as like share their own experience. I think it's those kind of experiences that are almost like the most helpful. Of course, it's good to know like the checkbox of information. Do they have this or do they have that? But even just knowing, did somebody feel like they were welcome? Yes or no at this venue? Did they feel like even if things weren't perfect, there was a genuine attempt? Or did it feel like, you were just completely sidelined or distrusted or sort of whatnot? So I think that's the thing we always really want to reiterate with folks when we ask for kind of like those crowdsourced submissions. I think people think we want them to go in with a ruler and see if the doorways are wide enough. And it's like, it's okay if you don't know all the answers, because whatever information you can provide is helpful.
PJ, let me ask you something. You touched on it a little bit early on in the conversation, where when people think about accessibility, they think about people who are using wheelchairs primarily, right? And the non-obvious disabilities are something that I want to ask about when it comes to, I think unfortunately we see this when Valerie had just said, a skip the line kind of thing. There's this, people are going to take advantage of this, and people who maybe don't have a disability are going to take advantage of this. And unless they see someone who has a noticeable disability using that type of accommodation, there can be, and it's unfortunate that we have seen this all too often, where it can actually create a lot of stress and sometimes unsafe situations in venues, right? So talk a little bit about that and even like the big picture thought process on that, like the idea that someone is going to take advantage of an accommodation, and from your own experience, as well as like what you see in venues, and how can we educate or even try to stop that from happening, which I don't know that we can, but talk a little bit about that.
Yes, unfortunately, it's a hard thing to stop, and it's a thing I see all too often. It's even like my disability is visible, and it's still been something that I've personally experienced. There was a situation that a venue brought me in 5 minutes early because they had to carry me up a flight of stairs, unfortunately, because it's inaccessible. And they put me on the barricade. And then I had people on Twitter all day, like calling me out and like saying that I was like using my disability as an excuse to like as a reason to get to the front of the line. And I'm like, no. But I think we just generally need more education because like there not a lot of people know about invisible disabilities. Like they look at you, you're standing, you're walking around, so why could you possibly need an accommodation? And that's not always the case. I think we just generally, like in the news media and stuff, need more, we need more stories on like invisible disabilities and such. And I think people would be, once they know, oh, they know the name of the diagnosis and they know like what's going on internally, they might be a little more understanding.
Yeah, I think it's not just the education about the invisible disabilities. I think there's also sort of this incorrect idea that the accommodations that we're getting at concerts are better than what the average concert goer is getting. It's not.
Yes.
In pretty much every situation, it is worse. So if
Mhm.
even in a specific, even if I get in the venue before you, I'm probably in the ADA section in the way back and I can't see anything.
Yep.
So there's never been a combination of accommodations that you can get that somehow puts you in like a better concert going experience than a completely able-bodied person. So I
100%.
think there also needs to be that understanding as well, as you may view this one part of my experience as a perk, but it is like the bare minimum that is allowing me to even be at this experience right now. So I think that needs to be understood as well, to hopefully help folks from wanting to take advantage, because it's not the hot perk that you think it is.
Right. Yeah. I think when they get in there and realize like where our seating is and stuff, like they're like, that's not worth it.
You're
Like
not up on
we're not
stage.
asking for, and we're not asking for special treatment, just equal treatment. I don't expect them to like let me sit in the middle of the stage during the show. I just want to be able to get in the building and see the show and be able to be in an area that I'm safe.
Let me ask about one other thing before we talk about volunteers, because we really want to get people involved with what you're doing. We've talked about the lighting accommodations. We've talked about some of the other maybe less I don't want to, popular is not the right word. People have less interaction with lighting, of course. And although we see it now, like in the beginning of video games or movies, if there's, some kind of sporadic lighting, there's a warning ahead of time. I've also seen shows that are specific for disability, right? Where they'll say they're going to have a show that is accessible, and it is really like getting to the root of many accommodations that are needed all at once. What are your thoughts on those separate events? And do you think that that's something that venues should do more of? Do you think that it's something that is like a good idea to keep moving forward with? Or sometimes there's a feeling that there's going to be, the show will be different in some way. Can each of you talk a little bit about that and what your thoughts are for future shows?
I think it really doesn't solve the issue. And I think the problem is specifically when we talk about live music, it's not just about where you're located geographically, it's also about the artist you want to see. So if an artist is doing 50 shows in a tour and they do one accessible show, is that going to be the one that you're located against? I've started to see movie theaters do accessible showings. So I know that there was accessible showings for The Little Mermaid and the Barbie movie, and that makes sense because you can go to any theater across America, and if they have an accessible showing, maybe once or twice a day at every movie theater across the country, you can get to the movie you want to see near you. But doing an accessible show, unless you are something like a Broadway or something that doesn't move, you just stay where you are, that doesn't solve the root of the problem. And sort of the reverse is, if you can make a show that's accessible and if you can make a certain version, then why can you not just do that for all of your versions? What is so different about this one version? And there are some certain things that I understand may be different, is like, maybe I know for some of like the accessible movie showings, it's been like they don't turn off the lights, or if you talk during it, like some of those social norms, we can kind of lift those. But what is it that really makes this so different that you can't do in other places?
Yeah, I really agree. Like, it's hard to do certain things at certain in like the live music space, because like Valerie said, like if they're only doing it in one city, it might not be the city you are going to. But whereas like a movie or like even like amusement parks and like zoos and stuff that'll have like sensory Sundays, like those are easy because they're in the same area. But like there's a lot of little things that they can implement at every venue, at every show. Like, why does it only have to be the one show that you have an interpreter at, or you have a safe lighting package at?
Yeah, and to your point, depending on where you're located, if this is something that is movable and going, to 50 states and, however many shows, the likelihood that you're going to be near one or able to even attend one based on your own schedule. And it does beg the question, if it can be done for one show, why can't it be done for all of them?
Yeah.
So let's talk about volunteer opportunities. I think what you're doing is so exciting, and there's so many. Everyone wants to go to a show of some kind, right? And to be able to participate in getting information to you. Talk about some of the other ways that people can volunteer for you and also bring information to you, and how can they apply?
So many different ways. In terms of applying, on our main website, under our About tab is a volunteer form, but it's anything from like classic volunteer database management, like those kind of roles that you would think about, to helping us, oversee our social media channels and, create content to our blog, to helping us spread word, helping us make TikTok videos and other different marketing materials, helping to say, I will table at shows in my area. I will collect the information of venues in my area. We really approach volunteering as listening to the volunteer and what are they willing to do? What are their needs? What gets them excited? Rather than, here's our 3 volunteer roles and you have to pick one. Our entire team, the Half Access board, and like we kind of operate as the staff, and there's only so many of us. So we really rely on our volunteers to help us with just some of our day-to-day operations. But anything as big as saying that you are going to submit, every single venue in your state to our database, to as small as saying, the next few shows you're going to go to, you're going to, share about Have Access with the artist, or even get on Twitter and tweet off their favorite artists. No action is too small. Of course, we love big actions.
Yeah.
But even just spreading the word, referring artists to us, we are happy and willing to take it from there, because the more people in power that are working with us, people that actually have the ability to make these changes, the better we can be. Again, like TJ said earlier, venues don't listen so much to fans, but if we can get artists, if we can get promoters, if we can get people that actually have kind of the bargaining power in the industry, that really is huge. And then, of course, on our side, continuing to source the information and spread awareness about the fact that we do exist, to kind of help in that meantime.
Well, I can't wait for our audience to really get all of your information, and we will put in the notes the venues that you have talked really well about, and also how people can volunteer, also how they can fill out information on the venues in their area. TJ, is there anything you want to let us know before we sign off today?
No, I just like make sure you guys go head over to the website and check it out, and follow us on social media at Half Access, because we would love to be able to. We want to get this message farther. We want to be able to work with as many venues as we can and as many artists as we can, and really make it a more national movement, not just like our small little core group, but like I want this to be the norm, not just like a special thing that like one band's doing. We want it to be everyone.
I think TJ, you said it as best as I possibly could. We want this to be the norm. I don't want to list off the 3 artists that did something really great about this lately. I want it to be like, well, everyone did.
Yeah.
Here are the 3 that didn't, but we just need to kind of flip that inverse. So anything that folks can and will do to get involved, and you don't have to be disabled to get involved. I think that's sort of another thought, is people think that this is not their fight, or it's not appropriate for them to get involved, and we need all of the support we can. Numbers do matter. So
Yeah, we need our allies.
absolutely. Even if you are still learning, this is new to you, we absolutely can use your help.
Thank you both so much. This is a great conversation. I feel like we could talk for the rest of the day about it. Thank you again for your time today.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you for having us.
Empire State of Rights has been brought to you by Disability Rights New York, your source for disability rights and advocacy. If you enjoyed our program, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this post. The video for this episode is available on our YouTube channel with closed captioning and ASL interpretation. If there is a subject you would like us to discuss, please email podcast@drny.org or comment below. For more Empire State of Rights, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.